You're listening to the Flex Success podcast, where we teach you how to be less shit.
I'm your co-host Lizzie, and this is Dean. We'll be covering all topics relating to health, fitness, and bodybuilding.
Join us as we use our in the trenches experience and up-to-date science to provide you with information that you can actually use.
If you like what we do, be sure to give us a like, follow, share, and tag us on social media. Guys, we are graced today by Ben Cant. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
Ben, we're really pumped to have you on the podcast today because from what I know about you, correct me if I'm wrong, you used to, coach Gen Pop and physique athletes, but your passion really lies in health, and that's what you focus on 100% of the time now. And I think that in physique sports, with the majority of our audience being bodybuilders, they care about their health, kinda, because you can't compete when you're dead, but maybe not as much as they should, and maybe they don't have a full understanding of the low-hanging fruits, and we really want to get into that with you today. But for those that don't know you, maybe we'll start with an introduction. Who are you? What do you do? And why do you do it?
Oh, all right. Look, thanks for having me on. I by background, a long time ago, many moons, I was a biochemist, but I haven't been in a lab for like 20 years, so I would be an absolute shame to the industry walking back into one now. But look, I got out of labs to actually, when I was about 24, 25, I got into weights training. I was a skinny kid. I wanted to train. I had no idea what I was doing. I remember walking into a supplement shop, and then I remember looking at everything, on the wall after a biochemistry degree, and I was like, oh, I think I can figure this out. And so I quit the lab, started working in a supplement shop. Turned out I was pretty good at sales, which I, don't really enjoy sales at the best of times, but with supplements, I just really enjoyed it. It's saying to me a lot. And I got to meet a lot of really other cool practitioners. So that sort of introduced me to a world of dietitians and naturopaths and nutritionists. So I was very lucky to work with some amazing people. And that really got me sort of away from like traditional lab-based, chemistry-based things into health services and dealing with people instead of equipment. And that was an eye-opener, but I just found it really pleasing, at the same time starting my own fitness journey. And I basically just sort of from there, I franchised a couple of the supplement shops. So I took it pretty seriously for a little while, but at the same time, I was always kind of running a bit of a consultative service as well. So I was always trying to turn customers into clients, and, it sort of turned into looking after some fitness competitors, you know what I mean? Before it was really a thing to do sort of online coaching or anything like that. This was before social media days and things. And then I got out of supplements and just kind of stepped further into that field of health, right? And because I always had a health bias before a sports bias, that's kind of, led me to what I do today. But really, bodybuilding, when I competed, gave me a platform. Before I competed in, I think it was 2014, my first shows, no one knew who I was. I never used Instagram or Facebook or anything like that. And so I'm very thankful for bodybuilding because it opened up a lot of doors for me, helped me create a brand. I enjoyed my time competing, sort of began to take on more competitors, as clients, which was really good as well. And from there, I still look up to some competitors, but it's sort of grown now to, it's definitely not just bodybuilding. I probably look after more strongmen or powerlifters as far as competitors go. But as well as that, there's just the thread of, chronic disease and health and a lot of bloods analysis and things like that.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
And so there's so many threads to pull on here because I love everything you do. It's very holistic, very health centric. If we're thinking about bodybuilders specifically, what do you think are some really red flashing lights that you see that people either ignore or they choose not to see because it's inconvenient, or some low-hanging fruit, generally speaking, when it comes to bodybuilding, that you think if people could just change these things, they could shave fewer years off their life?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it today, but I think like appropriate use of anabolics, if you're going to go down that pathway, just, learning how to somewhat mitigate, some of the potential pitfalls that are in that. And I think, you guys have been around and doing this for a very long time as well. So I'm sure you can appreciate like the landscape has changed so much over the last 10 years. You know what I mean? The access to information, like the general, you don't have to dig so far now to get access to pretty good quality information with this. And the same goes with nutrition as well. I think I look back to the days when I finished my degree, and I still remember being in libraries and using photocopiers and floppy disks. And it was really hard,
Mm.
to be like researching things. And now obviously we have the opposite problem, which is information overload, right? So,
Mm.
but I think, just some of the things that, people could be doing, are, look, I think I see a lot of gut issues in a lot of fitness people. So that's something I think, I know we'll get into probably nutrition today and things like that. But I think if you take sport pretty seriously, like it creates a fair burden on the body in terms of recovery and things like that. It may take its toll in terms of sleep. And a couple of those factors combined can very much take their toll on, someone's gut health. So particularly if we talk about preps and things where, it's an extremely arduous process. And, I'm constantly dealing with clients that come to me with really suboptimal bowel movements. So we can even start there. Like, what's one thing that people could be looking at? It's the bottom of the toilet bowl. You know what I mean? You're getting so much information there. And, I think like most things coaching, I don't know about if you guys would agree with this, but I find my female clients are very willing to kind of like engage and get coached and want to sort of like take advantage of tracking things and taking things seriously. It takes a little bit more, seriousness to get a lot of men involved and say, hey, this is important. Same with blood pressure. Take the boys needing to take their blood pressure. I find it's really easy for guys to want to get their bloods done because it's become a thing now. Everyone wants to get their bloods done and interpreted by someone who's not a doctor. But trying to get them to do just regular blood pressure readings, it's just not as fun, right? It's not as like exciting. So, but just kind of like settling into the boredom of some of those, low hanging fruit sort of metrics, I suppose, that you could be looking at, or symptoms that you could be tracking, I think is a nice place to start.
For sure. So starting at poo, I love that. Is it the Bristol stool chart that you would use with clients to kind of identify, or is there something else you would look at? Surely it's not like
Yeah.
photos and you're like uploading and assessing.
I get
Have you
offered
heard of
way too many photos.
ratemypoo.com?
Yeah,
You have?
exactly. What was that?
Have you heard of ratemypoo.com?
No.
So it's this website. I've not used it myself, but I have a friend, hi Alicia, who's obsessed with poo, and she did a poo once in the shape of a cock and balls, and she told me that she uploaded it to this website called Rate My Poo. And I don't know what the rating system's on. It's 1 to 5, and people like rate the photo of your poo. But I am getting sidetracked here. Bristol stool chart, is that what you use with your clients?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great though. Yeah. So like I have an opening questionnaire and then, there's a few questions on, bowel movements and digestion and things like that. But the one thing I've noticed, nearly universally, like, is that people will tend to underreport the abnormalities or the seriousness in which some of their gastric symptoms are, meaning it'll always be worse than what they put on paper. You know what I mean? And I find it more with men than with women,
Why do
so
you
that's
think
why
this?
I don't know. It's a touchy subject, I suppose. But no, I think really what we do is we normalize things so much, like we do in every facet of our lives, right? So the like if you're just normally half constipated or going to the bathroom every second day, or a certain amount of straining, that you do when you try to go to the toilet, or just a level of incompleteness that you feel, after time, it just normalizes so much that until you're actually verbalizing it like we are now, it's not really apparent. And usually even in that initial appointment, I'll have people, they're still not really clicking until we start tracking. And that's why I'm just a huge advocate of, tracking what matters with clients. And so even my bodybuilding clients that really, let's say they've got no other health issues, which is I tend to get the clients that do have more health issues and concurrently want to do competitive sports and things like that. But I have some very cut and dry, healthy, competitive people as well. There are certain things that I will still track. The Bristol is still one of them, because, throughout an athlete's life cycle with different training demands and recovery demands, and, you just want to keep an eye on them things, and this is one of them.
Okay. I'm curious to know, Ben, with your competitive bodybuilding clients, do you find that there is a typical issue like constipation or the opposite way around, diarrhea or something like that?
No, I mean, I wouldn't say typical. Like they're both common, you know what I mean? And sort of like even rotating between both is common as well.
Okay.
I think with more serious athletes who have fallen in love with the process and have very ritualistic style nutrition patterns and sleep patterns, it's not so much of an issue. I find it's the ones that are still sort of like probably a little bit looser with their routines. Perhaps there's just more diversity coming into their diet. They're kind of probably using it more of a even, not if it fits your macros, but more flexible, say, than some, you know. And that can sort of just create situations, you know, which can lend itself to bowel movements changing a little bit more so than someone who's a little bit, you know, more rigid, I suppose, with their practices. But I think like just bloating and distension is a really common thing that you'll see in a lot of, you know, bodybuilding competitors, for instance, and trying to figure out ways to sort of optimize that digestion, especially if they're in, you know, hypercaloric phases and things. Yeah, it's something that you can be looking at.
Do you, Ben, think that there's a level of not so much distension, but I suppose like gastric difficulty at times that may be classified as acceptable or normal? Or do you think things like, you know, fermentation and gas is something that you should be looking to try and mitigate or avoid at all costs?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what you're trying to do, like in the context of competitors, like for the moment, let's say, I think you're really trying to thread the needle between what's desired and what's feasible, you know? And what I mean by that is like, you know, let's just take hypercaloric phases, you know, like a sheer amount and volume of food that's got to go in, trying to keep it somewhat nutrient rich with whole foods and that kind of thing. It creates a lot of work for the digestive system, you know, day in, day out to be doing these things. And as, you know, we know like different clients will have different, well, baselines of health to start with, but also just things like schedules. You know, so you've got the client who's made a lot of room in his life for, the things that have to be done to compete, you know. And then you've got the client who's like shoveling in food while he's training a client, and you know, like it's, you know, a situation like that. And so I think you try to do what you can to create, you know, the best schedule, create a meal plan that works for you to digest best. And then you can look at some auxiliary things, like, so if there are certain, you know, supplementation things that you might look at, that could, you know, assist in that situation as well.
Yeah. That phase is one of the most interesting to me with my competitors, because it seems like, interestingly, like bodybuilders are very, very much, I think, aware and concerned of general distension, because there's this fear of having a larger stomach, right? So they're very, very aware of this, but then they kind of disconnect that with bowel movements sometimes. Like you said, there's, at least in my male competitors, there's less discussion about the specifics of bowel movements, but there's a lot of discussion about, oh, I'm bloated, and then there's some fear there. But
Yeah.
the interesting part for me is I think most guys seem to, and this I think transfers even into the just sort of general pro bodybuilder domain, have a bit of a reductionist approach with off seasons with fruits and vegetables, in that they think more food must equal more distension. Therefore, I should probably start to remove fruits and vegetables in this phase. And I'm of the opinion, or at least I've found that there's a tipping point where they start to reduce the volume too much. They then also start to slow down gastric motility. Is this something that you experience yourself or have an opinion on?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I still have the same issue, you know, with a lot of my guys as well. And again, I think it's a case of threading the needle. Like, you know, I'm sure you guys have mentioned this many times on this podcast, and in, you know, anytime you speak about the sport and things like that, it's like everything that we do with bodybuilding is not running in line with health necessarily. You know, there are certain facets of it which go, yeah, that's healthy. There's certain parts of it where you go, no, this isn't healthy, but this is what we're doing because this is the sport. What we're trying to do is minimize the effect of some of these behaviors, but yeah, it's important to acknowledge that. And yeah, I completely can relate to that, even with my own clients. And for me, it's a very much an individual thing. So whilst you can have a framework that you begin with, it really is about like finding that individual tolerance, I suppose, to, how many veggies or, fruits and things like that you're going to incorporate. I think one of the things, and this is, I'm not too sure if you guys are aware of this or not, but one of the areas, and let's take fiber, for instance, because it sort of fits in line now with this conversation of fruit and vegetables a little bit, doesn't it? One of the areas in which I think people aren't aware that a lot of boring fitness meals are probably more higher fiber than what is reported in your tracking tools is the resistant starch that we'll get if we cook and then cool rice and potatoes. So when you do that, like anywhere between about 5 to 7 grams per 100 grams of the food turns some of the carbohydrates inside convert into what's called a resistant starch, which is a type of fiber very, very good for the bowels, and it feeds the microbiome. It helps the microbiome create a lot of good compounds back for you as well. And so when you look at the fiber content of rice or potatoes, there's none there. Okay, so you don't sort of appreciate that they're actually already inbuilt into what you're consuming. And so if you took, like, let's just take a sample, diet here for a second, say there was 300 grams of cooked potatoes, at one meal and 300 grams of rice at another meal. When we reheat those the second time, we do lose like between 15 and 40% of that resistant starch. It basically sort of falls apart and you don't get the benefits. But let's be conservative and say that there was 3 grams per 100 grams left. 3 times 6 for 600 grams is still 18 grams extra fiber that they're consuming that they don't know they're even consuming.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
And so, yeah. And so that's where I sort of like, when I'm writing up plans, I sort of acknowledge that. I give people a list of like the high resistant starch foods. And I'm like, look, you're not going to find this in Chronometer. You're not going to find it in My Fitness Pal. It's not going to be coming up under the fiber totals that you're trying to hit towards your goal. But I'm all up for giving people quotas. So rather than writing out specific meal plans, I'll be like, hey, I want you to try and hit like 400 grams worth of resistant starch foods per day. I want you to try and hit 400 grams of, high polyphenol fruits and vegetables per day. And then kind of like guiding them into best use of that. But I think, back to the conversation about, hypercaloric phases and navigating those, one of the other things is fiber, right? Because I'm sure you've heard that feedback from your clients as well, is like, oh, trying to hit the fiber or trying to hit 5,000 calories. It's a bit of a minefield sometimes. And so that's something you can take into consideration, is this underlying resistant starch content in cooked, then cooled, then reheated rice and potatoes.
Yeah, or if you're anything like me, just eat your food cold because you've eaten out of Tupperwares for so long. In the show notes, I'm actually going to link a blog that I wrote on resistant starch some years ago for those that want to read more about it, because I don't know, I found it really interesting. So Ben, I want to ask you a question about fiber, but first I just want to rewind quickly on distension. I've had discussions with people before where they talk about, oh, I'm so bloated all the time, distension, and they don't seem to understand the difference between when I eat this full container of food that's going into my stomach. There's a difference between the feeling that you get when you're full and being bloated. And so I think maybe having that discussion with clients is definitely worthwhile, and for listeners to understand the difference between the two. But Ben, the question I have for you about fiber is, when people are tracking macros or writing a meal plan to macro targets, protein, carbs, and fats, the fourth target that they often have is a fiber target, might be 30 grams a day, 50 grams a day, something like that. And definitely we should be excluding the fiber that we get from protein bars because it doesn't count. Would you agree with that, Ben?
Man, I haven't looked at the back of a protein bar in so long now. I'm just like,
it's awful.
Not a huge fan.
No. I often find people who haven't been taught how to write a meal plan to macro tracking or macro track properly, they use something like a fiber supplement because they're like, yay, protein, carbs, fats, and fiber is hit. Dean and I both agree that a fiber supplement is kind of a band-aid because it doesn't really address the real problem of why you're not getting enough fiber. But I'd like to get your take on that.
Yeah, look, I think it really comes down to So if you have an otherwise healthy person who's not symptomatic of things and they're literally just trying to improve the quality of their meal plan. Okay, so really basic situation. I agree. I think like you don't want to, you know, as coaches, we're really trying to instill like a certain level of nutrition literacy and helping guide people into making those better choices. And, you know, really sort of like putting into context like a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, you know, and sort of like kind of making it pretty apparent that, you know, this supplement it's an auxiliary, it's a supplement. Like, what can we do? What's feasible, realistic, you know, to do consistently as part of the plan. So I think that that's important to acknowledge. One of the things that once you start entering into the territory of, okay, there is a particular set of symptoms that are occurring in the gut. So if client tells you, I'm bloating off of vegetables, I'm bloating within, you know, 60 minutes of having meals, I'm have some kind of intolerance to like beans or legumes or, you know, those types of things, then you start getting into a conversation like, okay, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to try and find out the root cause here? You know, the root cause could be something like a little bit of a dysbiosis situation, or, you know, some insufficient stomach acid, you know, things like that. Or as an interim bridging part of it, are we going to go, okay, well, what are we going to do until we know what that is? You know, are we going to support ourselves with some supplemental fiber? I'm fine with either of those strategies. You know what I mean? It's got to, the context has to be there to, you know, the individual. But what I would also say is there are particular fibers that are less likely to instigate, let's say, an adverse symptom with someone. You know, so you might have someone who will tell you, oh, I've tried to take the psyllium husk. You know, psyllium husk, really cheap fiber, $5 a bag, works well for a lot of people. For others, they'll tell you it feels like cement. They will get blocked up like crazy. Not a good choice for them. So that's the type of person, if concurrently they're either working their way to optimizing the fiber in their diet, or they're symptomatic of said foods, thus looking for an alternative, might go for a fiber that's less likely to aggravate something. And that could be something like a partially hydrolyzed guar gum. You know, it's a really gentle fiber. It's not really metabolized by anything in the small bowel if you had a bit of an overgrowth there. And so we generally see it's pretty kind, and, you know, with trials, it's been shown to relieve a lot of the common symptoms that you would see in the people like this, whether it's bloating or distension, diarrhea, constipation, and things like that.
Right. Interesting.
For those that aren't sold, or not so much sold, why should they care about fiber, Ben?
Mate, this is the conversation, isn't it? Look, at the end of the day, I think, you know, you have a lot of observational evidence on fiber. The like interventional stuff isn't so impressive, I suppose the word could be, right? And it's like, you know, all you have to take is the different camps of nutrition, you know, throughout the world. And, you know, you've got the carnivore or the keto ones. They're probably far more likely to be the ones holding the flag going, you don't need fiber, you know, so on and so forth, can call into play the weakness of these observational studies and stuff. But then they're also going to use observational studies, you know, to create their own point, you know. So this is the world that is, you know, nutrition, social media. But look, I think at the end of the day, you know, people ask me about carnivore all the time now. And I'm like, you guys are so young. You should like come back 20 years and we had Atkins, mate. It was the same thing. And in 2000, Atkins cured everything. In 2005, paleo cured everything. In 2010, intermittent fasting cured everything. In 2015, veganism cured everything. In 2020, carnivore cures everything. You know what I mean? And it's just like a merry-go-round that people go on. So I just, you know, when people take a really hard stance on these things, I'm like, look, I just give people time. I'm like, I really don't mind. I don't care what you do. But at the end of the day, for me, when people ask me my opinion, I'm like, it's hard for me to discard a wealth of data that is kind of to the contrary. And I'm someone who's to this day does a lot of research on the gut. I find it fascinating. It's such a massive topic. It's amazing. And to appreciate like the importance of fiber and prebiotic foods towards the health of the microbiome. So to take all of that away, I go, that's a really interesting concept. And I can understand it, you know, in terms of there are certain changes to the microbiome that happen on a ketogenic diet that do seem positive. Also, even just with periods of fasting, there's some beneficial changes that happen to the microbiome as well. But for sustained periods of time, it's really still anyone's guess. And for sustained periods of times when we start talking about decades and generations and things, and I go, no one has any idea yet. You know what I mean? Like, as far as I'm concerned, from an evolutionary standpoint, we're omnivores. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how you really want to make another position for it. So it'd be interesting to see if like certain parts of the population take carnivorism, through 10 generations. Like, let's sort of see what actually happens over 10 generations. I don't know. Be interesting.
It would be interesting. Ben, while we're on the topic of macros, or the things that people count: fiber, protein, fats, carbs, I want to ask you a question about protein. So I think we're all protein obsessed in the bodybuilding community. And we know it's important. I often find, though, that in lieu of people having like best practices around nutrition, I have nothing against protein supplementation. I use it myself. But what I find sometimes, people overuse protein powder. So their only source of protein in the day might be a little bit from fruit and veg incidental, but most of it is coming from protein powder. On a macronutrient level, it ticks the box. On a micronutrient level, it is different from typical protein sources: chicken, fish, beef, things like that. What's your opinion on if someone should, why someone shouldn't lean into protein powder? What might be the most that they should be using protein powder for as a percentage of their protein intake, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, do you find this more so in your more Gen Pop clients than your more serious athletes? Is this
So I've never
or do you find it in
Gen
both?
Pop. Dean is
Okay,
a
yeah,
athlete coach. I've only
yeah,
ever done Gen Pop.
yeah,
And so I can't really comment on the difference of the two demographics. But what I find is that people who lack the systems and routines to be prepared with their food lean on protein supplementation too heavily.
Yeah.
yeah. Perfect. That's what I wanted to hear. So yeah, look, I think in that scenario for those type of clients, of which I coach many Gen Pop clients as well, right? What I'm really guided by is, what are the things that are probably going to be much harder to get, without those protein, like meat derived protein sources. You know what I mean? So if they're not eating a lot of red meat, which is rich in iron, zinc, vitamin B12, if they're not eating a lot of fish, we're talking about the omega-3, selenium, iodine, things like that. So chicken, is not that nutritious micronutrient wise, but it definitely on the darker meats like the red meats and the fish, they genuinely are. And so like I think that's an important facet of it to appreciate is like, well, if are they able to hit these micronutrient targets in their goals to start with, and then if not, then you've got to really think about what does that look like. But I think for me, the way that I treat Gen Pop as well is like in terms of quotas. So like take fatty fish for instance. I'm a huge fan of fish, even though I'm quite disappointed in the way that the quality of the water is going, because there's just so many studies coming out in terms of things that probably going to deter people away from fish. But omega-3, I think at around about 1,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA, which is the active constituents in the omega-3, the good fat that's within fish, is probably going to get you to a status of omega-3 within your body, which is going to be highly correlated with reduced risk in many, many facets of health, like, cardiovascular, neuro, and all these things. And so I've got a way of explaining this quite easily to clients. And I say, listen, if you eat 700 grams worth of fatty fish per week, that's pretty much going to get you over the line. I'm using salmon as the example, but you could throw sardines or mackerel and other fish in there. That works out at 100 grams per day. Now, not many people that I know eat that much fatty fish unless they're very serious about their, nutrition and whatever. So I sort of say, so for every 100 grams under 700 grams, take a high strength, like a triple strength fish oil capsule, and that'll kind of get you to that quota. And so what that means is it's like the rule of seven. Okay. So if you had 400 grams worth of salmon per week, then that leaves you with 3 fish oil capsules to have. If you had 200 grams of salmon, that leaves you with 5 fish oil capsules to have. And for me, that's a really nice way to say to people, look, there is a flexibility in how you approach this and what is feasible. And let's face it, most people who enjoy fish enjoy it for certain periods of time. Meaning, if you write salmon on your client's meal plan for dinner 4 days a week, that's great for week 1. Not so great by week 4. I know you've all done it and you've gone, oh yeah, it's a good idea. Actually, like over time, that kind of gets a little bit too much, right? So them knowing how to transition or implement a supplement appropriately for their intake is a way that I would do that. So that's just an example, I suppose, of like kind of like creating that education and awareness, showing them a framework in which we can hit some of these things, and then encouraging best practices, whilst also having that plan B, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I guess it's like a recognition of the fact that the protein quality from an amino acid perspective in a protein powder is fantastic, but it is going to be devoid of some of the wins you get from these red meats and fatty fish, like you mentioned. So then you've got the opportunity to substitute where necessary or preferred.
Totally. And like this, it comes down to, something that I do day in, day out, which is like looking at blood work. And I'm like, look, the more someone chooses to be very selective, with their nutrient intake, I'm like, look, the price you pay for that, then it may be testing. You know what I mean? There is a larger emphasis on someone to like test rather than guess, who has a selective practice like that, than someone who has like a lot more diversity and you can see sort of easily hits these micronutrient targets.
Yeah. Dean recently moved, well, maybe a year ago, to Chronometer. Am I getting the timeline right? From MFP, because it takes the like sole focus away from macros and shows them, hey, there's like a gaping hole in your insert vitamin here. And so people can still wiggle foods around within their macro targets and have the flexibility that they need to be consistent, but continue to have a focus on quality.
Yeah, I think this is where like flexibility is designed to actually exist. You've used the word quotas a couple of times, which I really like, and I have a fairly similar approach in that it's, here is, if for somebody who I know is literacy of nutrition, as you said, is quite good. Here is the amount of protein, carbs, and fats I want you to consume, but within this, my expectations are that you will at least consume X amount from this column of fatty acid sources, and this column from, like you said, like legumes and beans and all of this sort of stuff, and that was sort of centered around, yeah, exactly that chronometer sort of schematic of, I know if they get at least the large majority of their food from these categories, that we're gonna probably nail off those micronutrients. Minus maybe a few things, which might even be an interesting segue for you here. Like some things aren't necessarily achievable through nutrition, and to like maybe pull on one thread, like a vitamin D, something like this. There are like a couple of those sorts of things that you typically will also then put within your quota system from a supplementation perspective for micronutrients.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think calcium, for those that won't like have a lot of dairy, is one that you'll see like, you rarely see someone get over 1,000 or 1,100 milligrams of calcium without dairy or with minimal dairy. And that's really common in the fitness world. I have so many people who will come to me and just go, I don't have dairy in the consult form for whatever reason. And that changes a lot of the time throughout the working together and stuff like that. But that is a very common one. The omega-3 I mentioned just before as well. And then the other thing, which, I'm not too sure how you guys feel on this topic, but I think that the adequate intakes or the recommended intakes for athletes, a lot of the times are just too low as well. And so that's sort of, I've spoken about this with like potassium and magnesium, choline, these types of things. And so the more physically active and the larger a person is, I sort of like try to help them understand, hey, this is how many milligrams per kilo body weight we want to get of zinc. This is how much we're looking for magnesium. And magnesium is a great example. Magnesium is really hard to get in food if you're not going down some of the legumes path, And so back here in Australia, I've talked a lot about a chickpea loaf. So Basan flour, which is chickpea, which they make here down in Melbourne, but I think it's available in Queensland, SA, and here at the moment, which is 660 milligrams of magnesium per 100 grams. And I'm like, you just do not see that. Like, that is beyond like levels above what you'll find on any other food. You know what I mean? And so that's a really easy way for someone to hit that daily quota of magnesium in like literally 100 grams of bread, which is like 2 slices, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's like a few examples of things that are really hard to hit. Vitamin D, like you said, but like, you know, for me, like the vitamin D, I truly do sort of encourage people to get like access to sun exposure as much as possible as well. I think, you know, it's part of a different conversation aside of nutrition. But, you know, like I think just teaching people like, you know, appropriate skin exposure, you know, to the UV light is a good practice for them to optimize their vitamin D levels for sure.
Vitamin D aside, I think there's so many more benefits as well to sun exposure, like taking a break, being in nature, like disconnecting for a second, mental, like unwinding. Hey, Ben, actually, a thought has just popped into my mind. I've been following you on Instagram for a very long time. So this is going back years. Like, excuse you if you don't remember, but I remember you talking about an app once upon a time, where you put in your, is it your ethnicity, your location, or the time of day or something, and how much sun exposure you would need based on those things to get enough vitamin D. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Or was it really long time?
Yeah, the app's called dminder. Okay.
Okay.
And it's literally as you described. So it just gives you an opportunity to, you know, put in your location, so to kind of get your latitude and, you know, the weather, your skin tone, and basically it just gamifies like what it assesses your level of vitamin D synthesis is going to be from that exposure to sunlight. And so, yeah, I made that a practice for a while actually with clients and showed them how to do it because it was just very interesting for them to be able to go outside, go for a walk, you know, put in uh, t-shirts and shorts or something like that. And it sort of racks up in front of you, you know, as the minutes go by, you can see the IU worth of vitamin D that supposedly that level of exposure allows you to create, you know?
Mm.
So, but yeah, I think that's a great way to, get all of those benefits that you said. And another important one for bodybuilders and enhanced bodybuilders as well is like that UV exposure, that sunlight exposure is very important for us to create our endothelial health with our nitric oxide, that gas that it allows us with vasodilation, you know. So yeah, I think just like getting outdoors, doing your green exercise, getting that exposure is a net positive in so many ways, even including that.
Mm. Yeah, I love it. Um, Ben, how about we'll wrap up with this question before we wrap up with the ridiculous things like the would you rather. Um, if there were 3 foods, your top 3, that you think people should eat more of because of nutrient density, what do you think they might be? Oh, can I guess one of yours actually? Watching your stories, I know you feed your kids sardines, so I'm gonna say that's probably one of them. But
Head
you tell
first
me.
now.
Was that sardines? Is that what you
Yeah,
said?
yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I force them to eat those.
They like it?
I get in with it. They do when they're young, and they grow out of it pretty quickly.
Oh,
Okay.
So,
really?
yeah, yeah. Unfortunately. But look, I mean, sardines, powerhouse of nutrition. You know, actually talking about calcium, like one of the easiest ways to get calcium in a non-dairy matter is sardines because of the amount of bones in them. You know.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think look, sardines absolutely is a micronutrient powerhouse. Uh, I mean, I'm a huge. I look at it through the lens of like what are the micronutrients which I think people really aren't hitting, and what might help them in that regard as well, I suppose.
Okay.
So for a big one for me would be choline. Okay, so choline is very important for our methylation, our acetylcholine, like our neurotransmitters and things like that. It's one of the most deficient nutrients across westernized diets as well. It's really easily gotten in eggs, which have been health shamed for so long and are kind of coming out of the valley of shame, you know, back into superfood kind of category. And general consensus amongst health bodies is yes, eggs are okay. So I encourage people to get enough choline. That's one of them. And I think, I'm just such a huge fan of polyphenols, the compounds that are contained in fruits and vegetables and things. That's a hard thing for me to reconcile with a carnivorous diet as well. And I'm like, oh my God, like every day I'm in research of something that anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, used for this disease, used for that. Like pharmaceutical companies are all over these things, using that info for the creation of their drugs. So high polyphenol foods are really important. To kind of give one is really hard because, you should distribute that a lot. I think something that's really easy is green tea, actually. If we want to put that in the same category as a food, like people just getting like a nice, good quality green tea is so high in polyphenols. So when people even think about like the Japanese Okinawans and, the longevity or, however you want to look at and describe that, their polyphenol intake, for instance, in some areas is up between 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams a day, which is enormous. It's so much higher than westernized countries. But when I look at the breakdowns, 80% of it comes through their drinks. You know
Amazing.
what I mean? It's not actually through like an immense amount of fruit and vegetables they're getting. They eat quite low calories and that thing as well. So I think green tea is a nice little addition that you could throw in there. But huge fan of things like blueberries and stuff like that.
Okay.
Mm.
So if someone wanted to jump on the green tea wagon, you mentioned getting a good quality green tea. How might one tell the quality of green tea?
Look, I mean, I just use a matcha green tea. I'm not too savvy, I suppose, with the brands as such, but like matcha's very high antioxidant properties, really high polyphenol. You can just get it as a powder, make up some hot water, put it in there, and you don't need a tea bag or anything like that. And I actually think it's really palatable. So I don't think it's a hard drink from a preference perspective for someone to make a consistent change for the better.
Okay. Have you ever mixed it with anything
No,
to change the
boring.
flavor?
Natural
Have you?
protein shakes, we've found the nutrient combo of all for these people that just aren't willing to, go down the route
Yeah.
of it's a
Matcha and protein shake.
it's a matcha protein shake with an omega-3.
I'm sure
Call it a
that's
day.
someone's done it out there. Yeah.
Amazing.
No, but that's if I had to choose a few though, I would throw those. I'd probably throw liver in there as well. Like I love liver. I mix it in with my beef mince. I get my butchers to do that. Yeah, I know. Very nutrient dense though.
For those just listening, I'm pulling a face. Gross.
Yeah.
I would
But
imagine that is masked quite well within beef mince, though.
Yeah, you can get away like anything over 10%, you tend to taste. You know what I
Okay.
mean? So, but I mean, it really depends on what you're flavoring it with as well. Like I have just a pretty standard kind of steak blend mix that hides the flavor really well. And my butcher does it's actually 18%. I figured it out because I got him to tell me specifically what he threw in because they do it in bulk and it's like kidney, heart, liver, 18% worth of that. But just a little bit of flavor or seasoning hides it really well. And most, like, if people are listening and actually want to try this, most butchers are pretty open to doing it, even if they don't do it regularly, so long as you sort of say to them, hey, I'm willing to buy this in bulk. So if you ring ahead or call up and say, hey, look, would you do a 10-to-1 ratio, beef or lamb liver with mince? If I buy 5 kilos of it, like, is that something you could do? More often than not, I've had plenty of clients that have asked that and gotten that through pretty successfully.
and no problem with freezing what you're not going to use right now, defrosting it for later.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I get like 10, 20 kilos at the time, just in 1 kilo packs, you know what I mean? Just popped in the freezer and defrost, go from there.
Cool. And what win are they getting there from a nutrient perspective for those that are listening?
Choline, for one, that I just said before. So liver is, I think, by far the richest source of choline from memory. But iron, copper, selenium, folate. So folate's another one. I know we're probably running out of time, so I won't hold up too much, but folate's another one where if someone sacrifices a lot of fruit and vegetables or legumes, you'll see they struggle to hit that folate intake, you know? So that's something, we go back to those hypercaloric phases. Sometimes it's, something to be aware of is, the things that drop out when they do drop those fruit and veggies out, folate would be one of them,
Okay.
And it's another thing if you take it in reverse, like when people are going really low calorie diets, you have to think from the other way around, right? So a simple change that I've often told people when it comes to their carbohydrate choices in lower calorie phases is, potatoes and tubers have far more potassium than rice, for instance. You know what I mean? So gets hard. You try and build out a really, I know you guys have probably tried, right, to build out a really comprehensive micronutrient meal plan at like 1600 calories or 1800 calories, and you are scrounging for things. And then you look at it like, this is not feasible. No one's going to do this, because you start having to do random things. And that lends itself to that type of conversation of like, don't diet forever. Like, it's stupid to like try and keep yourself down there. And the unfortunate thing is that whilst it's hard and you feel like you want to have a certain amount of flexibility, like how much flexibility do you really want to dig into from an 1800 calorie meal plan? You're going to take 300 calories away of nutrient devoid food. You're down to 1500 calories, to try and get those micronutrients. It ain't happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember a conversation I had with Luke Lehman once, or he had it on a podcast, I can't remember. And it's for sure true in that, an energy deficit doesn't necessarily mean a nutrient deficit, which I'm a firm believer of. But there is also a tipping point, like you've mentioned, whereby there's going to be a point where it gets very difficult to nail them all. And that is why obviously contest prep is not a healthy endeavor long term. And neither is excessive dieting, for these very reasons.
Yeah, I agree.
So Ben, we like to wrap up the show with some quick questions. The first one being a less shit tip. So our little slogan for the podcast is how to be less shit. If you could leave the listeners with a take-home point on how they could kill themselves a little bit slower, maybe, just going with the theme of today's podcast on health, what might that be?
I would go with the polyphenols.
Okay.
Yeah. Like polyphenols, plant-based compounds, like all the carnivores have totally tuned out. There's no carnivores that listen to this podcast anyway.
No, they're not our audience.
But no, I would say, look, nutrition can very much be, a longevity promoting thing. And some of those longevity, anti-cancerous, anti-inflammatory things are those awesome plant-based chemicals.
Okay.
Is there an opportunity for you to maybe give a recommendation on what you think your minimum effective dose would be from, say, nutrient-rich vegetables, non-cruciferous vegetables, and fruits in a day? Like, just as a bit of a touch point for people to go, oh, I eat 300, that's far too little. Or I already eat 800 and that's more than likely enough.
Yeah. I'm gonna base this off of, like, let's say a 2,500 calorie plan. So, you know what I mean? Something that's on the smaller side. And then people can scale that up. But I think, I sort of encourage most people to be consuming around about 300 to 400 grams worth of vegetables, in a day. 300 to 400 grams worth of resistant starch style tubers, rices, starches, things like that. And fruits was the other one. Fruits, sort of like, with fruits, I would sort of say probably a couple of 100 grams worth of fruits. And I just think, like, I really try to guide people towards berries as a fruit. I'm just like, hey, like, berries are just a real powerhouse. I love to have those in there. And then aside from that, I'm pretty open towards like the benefits of a diverse range of fruit. So it's like berries is kind of like a mainstay more than not, but the rest I would just do your thing.
And that seems pretty achievable, doesn't it? Like, when you spread that out over 3 or 4, maybe even 5 meals in a day, that's not a lot of fruit and veg, really. Like, it's so achievable, even in a deficit.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what, look, I mean, they're probably starting amounts, I should say. You know what I mean? So, like, when I'm first working with the client, I'm like, hey, here's what I want to do straight off the bat and go here to start with. And sometimes that's because maybe they're coming from lower than that and you know it. And if you start making shifts on resistant starch or fruits and vegetables, you can create more GI symptoms, right? Especially if you go too hard, too fast. So I would sort of start there. It's, point of departure, and then kind of like scale into the calories or the size of the person, as you sort of see fit from there. But yeah, they're definitely some of the things that I would sort of put under those quotas as such, to get that conversation happening.
The final question, the would you rather. I'm normally lumped with this because I can think of awful ones off the top of my head. But Dean, if you have one, you could ask Ben.
I would never disappoint the listeners by giving one of my poor efforts of a would you rather. So, no, would you rather eat a sardine tail first or head first? No.
Ben, I'm going to hit you where it hurts, and I'm going to put your children in this question, I think.
Standard.
Yeah. Okay. I always go for the low blows. Would you rather, your children are in their formative years, they're developing, they're young. Their nutrition is important. Their dad is a health expert. He cares. He feeds them good food. Would you rather just feed them shit for the next 3 years, nutrient void, high calories, or have them be sedentary up until the age of 20?
Oh,
Whoa. I'd have to take the former.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think I would.
Okay.
active and eat shit for 3 years, as opposed
Yeah.
to not active and eat very well for 20 years.
Yeah. I think I could cope with 3 years of just like what that would do. Right. But like another 16 years of just like real sedentary behavior. Like, how do you undo that's got to be so much more to unpack, right? As a 20-year-old to kind of try and flip that. Good one.
Would your
I'll try the
answer have
former.
changed if I said 15 more years? So like another 10 years of their life?
I don't know. But you know, here's the thing. Like the thing with kids is like that they could change to situation one despite my best efforts anyway. Because I don't know if we said this off air or not. Like, I can't remember if we were on air when we were talking about the sardines and the kids, but like
We were.
they don't eat them anymore now. You know what I
Ah.
mean? So yeah, it's like things change like this. Just when you think you've got it nailed, they're like, kids, man. You don't have it nailed at all. You're just hanging on. So
There's such a
yeah.
metaphor for life. Like you can do your best to plan, but like let's laugh at that plan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like if you'd have asked me, I would have thought a child set up with particular nutrition behaviors would be more likely to stick with them than to all of a sudden just decide that they don't like sardines at the
They
age of,
like it.
whatever your children
Yeah.
are like that. I was like, oh, I would have thought it'd be the other way around. But I guess.
Nah, that man, I'm constant. Like, I love developmental psychology, right? So when I was at uni, I started doing a double with psych and biochem, and I stopped the psych in the last year so I could major in chem. I don't know why I did it, but I wanted to be a forensics guy. That's what I wanted at the end, and so I'm very interested in like developmental kind of stuff, and just becoming a parent and actually seeing it live in front of you, it's just something else to witness. And as a coach, like, I'm always trying with these different strategies. And like the one that I find just works the best with nutrition is I just like reverse psychology them. I just like pretend they can't eat what I'm eating. I'll have my arms around them, I'll look at them, and I'll gamify it, right? And they can't help themselves. They're reaching over and trying to grab liver and this and that. And I'm like, my wife's looking in and she's just like, she just shakes her head because she doesn't eat any of this stuff. I'm like, see, I still got it. I can still flip them.
Hey, you got a plan. I like it. Now,
Uh,
if people wanted to follow you or reach out to you, where may they find you?
Pretty much just on Instagram, Benny Lifts on Instagram. That's where I try to stay pretty consistent. But yeah, like I consult, I coach, I mentor a little bit as well, and people can reach me there if they like.
Okay, amazing.
It's actually Benny lifts a lot. That's what the handle should be.
Benny does lift a lot. Benny is
Benny
jacked.
lifts a lot.
Yeah.
Holding on. Holding on.
Ben, there's so much more that we want to talk to you about, and we didn't even touch on PEDs, which I know is absolutely something you could share a lot with us. So I'd love a 2.0 if you're interested at some point in the future.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Until the next episode, everyone, have a good one.